In the world of One Piece, it's not even up for debate at this point that Rox Zebek is one of the strongest and most infamous pirates to have ever sailed the seas, with many of his actions with his crew needing to be completely erased from history itself. And one of Rox's biggest claims to fame is the fact that he had three of the most infamous modern day pirates under his banner, that being Whitebeard, Big Mom, and Kaido. I've already talked extensively about Whitebeard in other videos, so by all means check those out, but today we will be having the God Valley variants of Kaido and Big Mom facing off against two individuals who participated in the downfall of their future counterparts, that being Captain Eustace Kidd and the Surgeon of Death Trafalgar D. Water Law. Lately, on some Gojo versus Sukuna kind of timing, we have the most dysfunctional duo of today versus the most dysfunctional duo in history. If you're new here, I appreciate you checking out the other videos I have on the channel. Subscribe if you like what you see. But now let's move forward with measuring the strength of Big Mom and Kaido during this period. Now, as grand as God Valley was hyped up to be, the unfortunate reality of how things were presented in the flashback does not give us too many showings of many characters present during the battle, and this would most definitely apply to Charlotte Linlin herself, as well as the future King of Beasts, Kaido. I created a poll in regards to God Valley Big Mom's strength, with many people having many interpretations on her character in the comment section, so if you don't agree with my perspective, that is fine. However, I do believe that Big Mom during this era would scale anywhere between the first commander tier of strength at the lowest interpretation and the Yonko Commander Plus tiers at the highest interpretation, YC Plus being the unofficial fan rank that puts characters definitely over the first commander level characters, but not quite on the level of the Yonko and Admirals. This isn't in any way to downplay Big Mom. She was, after all, an asset to the Rocks Pirates. Zebek's mission was to overthrow the world government and become the king of the world. For a dream as grand and ambitious as that, he is not simply allowing anyone to join his crew. His goal requires having strong fighters at his side. But we clearly know due to chapter 957, based on Sengoku's words, that Big Mom and Kaido back then are not comparable to themselves in the modern day. It's even reinforced by the narrator after the conflict in 1167 that the pirates at God's Valley all got stronger since the big battle, and we just know for a fact that Kaido was nowhere near the strength he was during Wano, and Big Mom was able to hold her ground against this Kaido for 3 days. Obviously, we don't know if they used their strongest abilities during this fight because it was off screen, most likely not given the statements made later during the arc for both characters, but they are at least relative to each other base to base here. The main point I want to hammer home is that whether you think that Big Mom was at her best during Wano, or maybe sometime after God's Valley, such as around the time of Odin's voyage with Whitebeard and Roger, she was most definitely not at her prime during the God's Valley incident. Now, when talking about her abilities, we see Big Mom during the flashback having access to her signature homies, that being Zeus and Prometheus, when using her Heavenly Flare Blitz attack against Garp, and Napoleon during the huge assault against Imu, when she uses the Ikoku Sovereignty. So essentially, we have a version of Big Mom who, for the most part, does indeed have the majority of her abilities in her arsenal, with the only caveat being that it is not at her max output later on in her life. And the same can be said of Kaido as well. Although this version of Kaido is indeed a young pirate, he too was literally scouted by Rocks due to his power, meaning even in this period of his life where he is still overall a rookie compared to his contemporaries, young Kaido is definitely not a lightweight. Despite not being at his best here, I'd say overall he would be relative to Big Mom during God's Valley, but Big Mom should still be stronger than him at this point in time due to her having much more experience with her Devil Fruit abilities than Kaido. Yes, Kaido was able to get the drop on Big Mom, allowing for him to steal and consume his fruit, but the reality is she did get sneaked by him and it wasn't KO'd by his attack, and immediately retaliated in anger over getting screwed over by him. Kaido being able to clash with this version of Big Mom more than likely means he also has advanced Conqueror's Haki at this point in time as well, although it is off screen. We don't know exactly how the clash looked like. It could have possibly been just Big Mom lashing out in anger. If you choose to believe that, that is completely fine, but I'm going with the interpretation that this was a clash between Kaido and Big Mom for the video. And in regards to Kaido's Devil Fruit, we clearly know that within a few moments of eating it, he was able to transform into his dragon form, which is actually pretty significant for this discussion because of the way a Zoan fruit works. What I'm going to say is indeed speculative in nature, and if you choose not to believe it, that is completely fine. But it is entirely possible that Kaido could access his hyper form during this time. If we go back to Enies Lobby where Kaku and Khalifa ate their fruits, they both were able to grasp the names and powers of the Devil Fruits immediately after consuming them. That doesn't mean that they would master their powers as we see see with Kaku gaining access to his awakening form 2 years later, but they were able to use the basic application of their abilities instantly. So hypothetically, Kaido should have access to at least his hybrid form since he is after all a Zoan, and based on Kaku accessing it in a short time, but he definitely hasn't mastered the extensive abilities of his mythical fruit, which include not just his blast breath, but also breathing lightning, having wind blades, being able to conjure up storms and tornadoes, and having access to his flame clouds as well as his fire transformation. Like I said, this is overall speculative using the knowledge we currently have in the story, not saying it is 100% a fact, but throwing the idea out there that it may be possible. But now that we've covered their stats, let's jump into the battle to see how they fare against Kid and Law. So in the battle between the Rocks duo and the Supernova duo, although Big Mom and Kaido are closer in strength to Kid and Law at this point in time, the old legends are indeed the underdogs in this discussion. I highly recommend people to actually reread the entire fight of Law and Kid facing off against Big Mom, because it is a huge misconception that Law and Kid simply won only due to the bombs going off at the very end of the match and completely disregard the entire fight and the statements made during the battle. Not only was Law and Kid not fresh when they entered that fight due to the battle that took place on the roof during Wano, but it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that Kid and Law just have feats and abilities that allow them to dominate in this matchup. Like I said earlier in the video, both Big Mom and Kaido are not lightweights at all during this battle. Xebec is not allowing any weak people to slow him down on his way to fulfilling his dream. Kaido and Big Mom were very clearly a part of the main crew. But based on what we know, Kaido and Big Mom are not putting much of a dent in the Supernova duo. Big Mom does have a lot of power with her homies, which for the most part would give significant damage to many characters of the series. Her heavily Flare Blitz attack being effortlessly tanked by Garp isn't really an anti-feat against her, because Garp was already confirmed to be on the same level as Xebec and Roger by the narrator, and it's just blatantly shown in the final battle against Demon Xebec, which is something that neither Big Mom or Kaido could accomplish at that time. So if Big Mom lands her attacks, I don't think Kid and Law are going to casually shrug it off in the same vein as Garp did during God's Valley, but both Law and Kid at multiple points during Wano tanked several attacks from the older Big Mom's homies in her base form as well as in her Amp Soul Focus form. For example, the Supernova all got hit with Big Mom's God of Lightning Tenjin attack, Kid and Killer flat out tanked Big Mom's Fulgora attack on the roof, while carrying Kid when he was being nerfed by Hawkins, Law tanked Big Mom's Stolen Fire attack, and just the many times Big Mom landed against the both of them while in her Soul Focus state. Kaido's dragon form is also not really relevant towards this discussion. All of the Supernova were capable of doing damage to Kaido's dragon form during the roof piece. Although Kaido does get a boost in his defensive capabilities via his scales, he flat out states that the Supernova's attacks are actually working on him and that they aren't just being mindless fools or relying on guts to win the fight. Kaido, although a strong combatant overall during this era, is inexperienced no matter how you slice it. But I'm sure many of you are just itching for me to talk about Big Mom and Kaido's advanced Conqueror's Haki and how it affects the battle. And without a doubt, Big Mom and Kaido using their Conqueror's Haki is relevant. It's just the fact that the potency of Conqueror's Haki attacks are just on another level compared to basic or advanced armor Haki. Even if a character is overall weaker than their opponent, their Conqueror's Haki code attacks can still be effective against them. We've seen that fact being displayed at multiple points, such as Yamato's attacks against Green Bull, as well as in their battle against Kaido, Zoro's clash against Kaido, as well as Luffy during the early part of their fight with Kaido, where Kaido just flat out states his application of Conqueror's Haki was crude at that point in time, but was still strong enough to hurt him. And even though we don't see it in the flashback, it's heavily implied in chapter 1009 that Big Mom and Kaido developed their Ocean Sovereignty combo attack back when they were crewmates. So with all that being said, how exactly would Kid and Law be able to respond to their opponent's powerful Haki? Well, first things first, and that's to say that even though the Rocks duo has Conqueror's Haki, it doesn't really make it an auto win. As we already know, Big Mom and Kaido in the current era dwarf their God Valley counterparts in power. No matter how strong their Haki is, neither of them are going to be able to match the output of Wano Hybrid Kaido's Thunder Bagra. Law flat out took that attack and still proceeded to participate in the Big Mom fight afterwards. It wouldn't make any sense to say God Valley Kaido and Big Mom are able to match the strength of Emperor Kaido. And in regards to Kid would be bare minimum relative to Law. Also, there's simply no guarantee for the old gen duo that they'll be able to keep their weapons on hand during the fight. We see during the God's Valley flashback that Captain John was capable of pulling in the weapons of multiple characters, including Scopper Gabon, who himself is a conqueror. The only conqueror on screen able to completely bypass the ability was Roger, and as we talked about earlier, the only people on Roger's level was Garp and Zebek. So it's highly likely that Kid can genuinely take away Big Mom and Kaido's weapons with just the basic application of his powers. But even if you don't believe that to be the case, the fact is that with his awakening, he 100% magnetized old Big Mom and Napoleon got stuck to her. So even if you think his basic powers wouldn't cut it, his awakening is definitely pulling their weapons away depending on where he marks the assigned locations. We've seen in One Piece multiple times that when characters don't have access to their main weapons they use in battle, they perform much worse than usual, so Kaido losing his War Club and Big Mom losing Napoleon would be detrimental to them. Not to say that they are completely powerless, but that is a significant loss. And in regards to Law, things get much worse for the old gen duo due to them not scaling to their current era counterparts, because that means it's possible for him to use Shambles and Amputation on them. Law says the reason why he couldn't use Shambles on them before was due to their powerful Haki, but since they are far weaker in this instance compared to their current eras, they likely could be affected by the attacks, and if he can, that low-key ends the fight if it lands just because of how powerful Amputation is as an offensive move. And also, what I think is even more disgusting is if we assume that Law is capable of using Shambles on Big Mom and Kaido, then that means Law is likely able to switch their souls like he did to several characters in Punk Hazard. And at that point, he and Kid are just bullying the two of them since Kaido doesn't understand Big Mom's powers. In fact, I'm not even sure Kaido could use them since the homies are actually connected to Big Mom's soul. So if Law can do that, the old gen duo are getting curb stomped very badly. However, similarly when we were talking about Kid's abilities, if you think it's impossible for Law to use Amputation or Shambles on this version of Big Mom and Kaido, Law has canonically been able to shamble away Big Mom's homies from her. Not only that, but Law literally one-taps Misery, who is the combination of her strongest homies. Going off this feat, Law should be able to take out Big Mom's homies on his own after teleporting them away from her, which will once again diminish Big Mom's firepower by a large margin. Law's abilities canonically were throwing off Hybrid Kaido as he says himself, and Law was able to damage him with his Injection Shot attack. So needless to say, attacks like Injection Shot, Counter Shock, or Gamma Knife are doing solid damage. And if Law uses his Awakening and lands Shock Will on either of them, the fight ends. Shock Will was so powerful, Big Mom herself acknowledged just how dangerous Law was as a combatant. And this is the same attack that can do solid damage to Blackbeard and clash with the Quake Fruit. The potency of this attack is no joke. Shock Will landing on the weaker versions of Kaido and Big Mom might unironically KO either of them, and at the bare minimum giving them significant damage that they just can't ignore. Also, it's entirely possible Law can block a bunch of their attacks via Current, which would be pretty bad for them, all things considered. So essentially, Big Mom and Kaido in this match get hard countered by Law and Kid's abilities pretty badly. Obviously, they could still brawl using their Conqueror's Haki attacks, but their output gets reduced not having access to their weapons. Regardless, if they are able to land their attacks, it's not like Kid or Law are capable of taking stronger ones. Their only possible win con is if they use a combo attack like Ocean Sovereignty, but not only would it likely not scale to their current forms, but Law literally can just teleport him and Kid out of the way, just like he did with the Supernova on the roof. Hypothetically speaking, Big Mom should still have access to a Soul Focus form. If she sacrifices her lifespan, it can still heal herself using her lifespan as well, which yes, it would boost her strength and allow her to stay in the fight a little longer, but she would just be overall weaker version compared to her elderly self. As I said earlier, we don't know the exact scaling of Big Mom during this period, but she for sure was over Kaido at this point in time, and both of them are not at their peaks of power yet. Personally speaking, I don't think she is a top tier at this point in time for the overall verse, but that's just my opinion, and I don't mind having discussions about it in the comments below. So Law and Kid win this matchup and are claiming the title of the most dysfunctional duo in the verse. I appreciate everyone who watched the video. Feel free to check out the other stuff I have on the channel and subscribe if you like what you see. I hope you have a great day and please stay safe. Peace.